Here's a bottle and an honest friend. What would ye wish for, merman? What kens before his life may end? Okay. I'll stop there because I just don't want to kill the poem any further, and I especially don't want any Burns fans out there to kill me either. Well, hello. I'm Kel, the guest of Guest Wines, and welcome to our Wine and Dine with Collins Fine Foods Burns Night Supper Special. Collins Fine Food have prepared once again a fine array of delicious dishes, and we have selected 3 marvellous wines. So before we go any further, can I check that we have the following wines with us? The Casa Silva Reserva Chardonnay, the Destisargues Côte de Beaune, and the Stanton and Killeen Rutherglen Muscat. Brilliant. Right, now we're ready to go. But before we tuck in, I think it's just important to just go over a little bit about wine tasting itself and food and wine matching, and then we can get on to the dishes. So with wine tasting, wine drinking, as I've said before, wine drinking is a wonderful pastime. Fill your glass up with wine, pop it in your mouth, swallow, fantastic, job's done, the world is right. With wine tasting, what we're going to do is we're going to take a step back and just think for a little while and focus on what it is we're actually tasting in the glass. And how we do this is that we go through 3 main steps. So this is looking at the wine, sniffing the wine, and then tasting the wine. And what we're going to do there, I suppose there's a 4th step. And the 4th step is that we're going to assess the wine. And what we're doing is just saying, well, the most important assessment is, do we want another glass of this wine? Is it good that we want another glass? And that's kind of what we want to get from the wine. Now, a wine doesn't need to necessarily be an expensive wine, nor does it necessarily always be a well-made wine. What it needs to be is a wine that you want another glass of and you enjoy it. Okay? So I'm going to take you through these steps, and then this is what we're going to do with the wines throughout tonight's Wine and Dine. So you can follow me or you can just drink the wine. It's totally up to you, but it'd be great if you could have a go, because then it's always nice to see if you can assess or make anything out of any similarities that I get in the wine, or that you've got your own ideas yourself, which is always good, because we have to remember that wine is a subjective experience. Wine tasting is a subjective experience. It's not something that's just set in stone. And that's why when I use wine tasting terms, there will be ones that are familiar words that I will use, so that I can be able to convey over to you, so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. Is my experience of what I'm experiencing in this glass of wine. Hopefully that somewhere along the line we'll kind of meet maybe on the halfway mark, or we'll might be spot on with what we're sort of saying about the wines, or we might have disagreements about what it is we're experiencing, and I think that's the beauty of wine tasting. So without further ado, what we're going to do is we're going to actually look at the wine, and this is what we're looking at. It's nice and clear, it's white. Now, to make a white wine, we need grapes, white grapes, but you can actually use red grapes, but I'll come on to that when we get to the red wine. And the more you look after the grapes in the vineyard, the better chances are of making a nicer wine in the winery. So what we're doing is you're looking after the grapes in the vineyard, and the grapes, which grapes you use will depend on lots of things, lots of factors: the climate, the kind of wine a producer wants to kind of make, the soils, etc., etc., etc. Here, this is Chardonnay. This is a Chardonnay from Chile. And what they've done is they've got the Chardonnay grapes, looked after them in the vineyard, and then brought them into the winery. And then in the winery, they give them a pressing, and this pressing, you get the actual juice from it. So it's the juice that then they transfer into tank. And then to make the wine from the juice, you then add yeast, and the yeast then start to eat the sugars, and they convert this into alcohol, and then we get lovely wine somewhere along the way. So, excuse me. So here we have a nice wine, nice and clear. And I would say again, we're filling your glass. Fill it to where the glass starts to curve and no higher. One, it just looks nice. Two, it allows oxygen in this rest of the bowl here to interact with the wine. This is important because then it allows what's called volatile compounds to release. So these are the aroma compounds that we want to be able to taste the wine and smell the wine with. Excuse me. And also, because we're going to do a little bit of swirl, this swirling again, it's allowing the wine to interact with the oxygen and releasing more aromas, we would hope. Now, firstly, we're going to look at the wine, and it's nice and clear. Most wines are. There is some wines that go to the natural wine banner that do have a sense of cloudiness about them, and they're purposely made like in that way. But most wines are not, and this wine isn't. So it's meant to be clear, and that's what we're looking at. We're looking at clarity in the actual wine. Then what we're going to do is look at it and think, well, that looks nice. And I would say it's probably like a nice, I would say, excuse me, a pale golden colour there. There is lots of different terminology, but I think I'd go for a pale, nice pale golden. Some people might call that straw. It looks good, looks clear, looks clean, but we won't know until we've actually gave it a sniff to see if it is either a nice wine or if it's got a fault. And I mean, a fault could be anything like, say, cork. Cork is like it's a damp, mouldy, musty kind of smell you get, and it's not very nice. And you'll instantly recognise it. You can get other faults like it could smell like blocked drains or rotting vegetables. Again, stuff that you obviously don't want in a glass of wine. So this is nice. Give it a whirl. Give it a sniff. I stick my nose in. And I'm greeted by ripe fruits. So again, this real ripeness. So it's come from Chile, which is a warmer country, but this is from an area called the Colchagua Valley. This is a southwestern corner of a bigger area called the Rapel Valley, but this is down in the corner. So even though there's some warmth there, which I'm getting these nice ripe fruits, it is an area that's a little bit cooler. And that's designed to retain some of the acidity. Hopefully we'll taste that one. We'll be able to pick that up when we actually taste it. So give it a sniff. I'm getting these nice ripe fruits, like I would say, like apple, pear, maybe a bit of melon going in there. There could even a little bit of hint of tropical fruit loitering around the back there as well. And I'm also getting a little bit of spiciness, like maybe a little bit of something like cinnamon and then vanilla as well on top of that. So, but it smells nice. There's no faults to it. It doesn't smell wrong. I'm not going, oh, that's nice. It's got a nice, pleasant smell. It's lifted. The nose is there. It's quite pronounced, where I'm kind of easy to smell. It's enjoyable just by itself. So then, to give it a taste, this is the taste of it. Though I would say to do this, right? Obviously, when you just drink wine, you just pop the wine in, swallow. Fantastic, job done, the world is right. To taste the wine, like I said earlier, it's about pausing, it's taking a moment to stop and just consider what you're doing, focusing on the wine. So here we're going to pop the wine into our mouths and we're going to hold it for a little while just so we can see what other characteristics develop from this wine. Now, I would describe, well, it's a little bit embarrassing, it's a bit of a, I would say don't do it in a restaurant, probably. That's probably the best way to describe this, what we're about to do. I would say it's about whistling backwards. That's probably the best way to describe it. Rather than whistling out, you're whistling backwards, and then we're going to whoosh the wine around a bit like a mouthwash in our mouth, and then we can swallow. Okay, so I'll do it first, and then you can have a go after you've watched me do it. So here we go. So we're popping it. And again, another thing is not to put too much in your mouth, because sometimes the alcohol that's in the wine can tickle the back of your throat. That can make you cough. If it makes you cough, the person, if you've got anybody opposite you, will not appreciate what might happen next. All right, okay, so I'm just going to pop it in my mouth. That's nice. And this is nice just by itself. It's got a lovely freshness about it. This nice acidity that makes my mouth water all the way down the side here, all right, to the tip of my tongue. Lovely freshness. And this is because where they've chosen to put the vineyards here in the Colchagua Valley, it's got some coastal influence, and there's also an array of little rivers that run around this valley, and they also supply the area with cooler air to keep the vineyards just that sort of more temperate, which allows the acidity in the grapes to be maintained, so we don't lose that, whilst at the same time the warmer environment allows the grapes to ripen and gain some of its ripeness through its sugars, but also phenolically. That means where the flavors and aromas are also captured, and they kind of enhance as the growing season goes on. So I've got this lovely freshness, and then I've got an explosion of fruits, and it comes out particularly on the mid palate, and the mid palate gives it also a little bit of weight. There's that ripeness, that fruit that's there, but this acidity just lifts it up. It keeps it there, it keeps it fresh, and it makes it run through and cleans my palate at the end. Because I think 20% of this wine has been aged in some oak, which is French oak. So it's gave it a little bit of spiciness, but it's more to do with seasoning than it is to do with drowning it out in oakiness. Now, there used to be some wines not that many years ago where it was quite fashionable. People liked it, and it was all about big, bold, brash, loads of oak, very spicy. And sometimes those wines can actually be quite nice if they're made right. But I think nowadays is more of a fashion, and also just I think because the fruit, and you want to be able to taste the wine as well. The oak's really there to just give it a bit of lift and enhancement, a little bit of seasoning, and this is what this is doing. So I'm getting that sort of spicy oak, but it's gentle. It's not intrusive actually on the actual fruits itself, and they're still quite evident there. This has had time being left on its lees in the tank and in the barrels. And what we mean by the lees is, as fermentation's going, as I've mentioned, it's the yeast that's eating away at the sugar and converting that into alcohol, thus turning the grape juice into wine. The yeast, as it goes on, when the alcohol gets higher and higher and higher, the level of it, it then starts to kill the yeast, and the yeast then fall to the bottom of the tank. And so do little bits of grape and other bits that are in the tank as well from the grape itself and what's coming through the fermentation. Now, this is called the lees, and quite often the winemaker, as this is going on and once the fermentation stops, they will, what's called often racking, they will take the wine away from the lees and put it into another tank, and it just keeps the wine nice, clear and fresh. But occasionally, winemakers will want the wine to be left on the lees. This has various benefits. One of them is it protects the wine from oxygen. Oxygen at the wrong time in a wine can make the wine turn to vinegar. So it's great at protecting it from oxygen getting into the wine at the wrong time. The other thing is if it's left in, you give it a little bit of stir around and you mix these lees back into the wine itself, it can add then texture to the actual body of the wine. And this is what it's done here. It's gave the wine that nice roundness to it. There's a bit of a textural feeling in the mouth. You can feel that weight. It's just not all about this thinness, zippiness. Though there's a zippy acidity that runs through it, the actual weight is there. And that kind of, I think it shows off the fruit, the ripeness of the fruit. It gives it a better, it puts it a bit on a pedestal, the fruit, to say, this is really nice fruit here. But then the acidity then just keeps it nice and clean. Now, the foods that we've got to go with this, line up in your starters, are a choice of either the Cullen skink, the pan-fried scallops, or the leek and potato soup. And I think this will work smashing with any of those. One, I think because the wine itself is, it has got these lovely ripe fruits. There is some pronounced fruits on the nose, but it's not overdone. They're not intrusive. They won't be intrusive enough to get in the way of the food. They won't drown out the actual aromas and tastes of these dishes. They will be there to just enhance those flavors. And plus the fruit, plus the actual food itself will play with some of the fruits in here and lift them out. And together, they'll just make a better enjoyment of both the foods and the wine. And this is what you're doing when you're tasting wine. You're tasting the wine for itself, and it's good wine, and hopefully that's giving you enjoyment just in what it is. And then when you're tasting the food is itself its own package of of various aromas and flavors and textures that come out. Combining the two, then you get a third dimension, and that's kind of what we're creating here. This third dimension, the wine, like say for example, the acidity then cuts through. It not only cleanses your palate and keeps your palate fresh, but it also lifts all those aromas and flavors in there and just brings them more to the fore. And I just think it lets them travel so that on your palate, you're getting them enhanced. It's like the volume's slightly turned up in them. And also for the food with the wine, the food is giving the wine its own sense of place where you'll pick out some more of the fruits, and maybe the texture of the wine becomes rounder, wider, broader on the palate, but then you've still got this freshness that then goes through and just keeps everything in check of where it's supposed to be. And something like this with Chardonnay, I think it's a great wine to have, because it offers those fruits, it offers those freshness, but like I said, it's not intrusive on there. It won't drown out the delicate flavors of the starter dishes. And I think whatever you've chosen, this is a bit of a winner. But I would say also have a glass by itself before, just to enjoy it as it is, because it's wonderful. Now, Casa Silva, this is who's made this. They a family-owned operation, still are. They've been going a long time. Well-known producer in Chile. A lot of their wines are from the Central Valley, where this one is. The Rapel is through the Central Valley. Now, Chile is an interesting country itself. It's on the western edge of South America. It's a very, I would say, like a thin strip that runs down the side. But it's interesting in that I think it generally got a reputation for being a country where it's bright and sunny, wines are fairly constant, and it makes good wines, it makes bright wines, but sometimes they're all a bit samey. Well, that's not really true anymore about Chile. The Chileans have really sort of invested in looking at terroir and looking at more places in which to plant vineyards and grow vines, and they've moved away from the city of Santiago, where a lot were originally planted, with it being the big city, and that's where, to quickly get the wines into the citizens there. Now they're looking at vineyards in all different diverse places around the country, which is great, because the country is very diverse. Because at the top you've got the Atacama Desert, a very dry place indeed. At the bottom you've got Patagonia, and you've got ice and penguins. And then to the west you've got a very cold Pacific Ocean, which has a current called the Humboldt Current that comes up from the Antarctic. And this provides a really cold stream that comes alongside the country. And because the country has a Mediterranean climate, it draws this in, this cool air. It comes in through all the valleys and the mountain ranges. There's a coastal range of mountains that run along the side, and through here, it channels it through. And this enables the vineyards to cool down and keep its aromas and also its acidity. And this is kind of what they're doing here with the Chardonnay. And then you go right over to the eastern side, and you've got the Andes Mountains that run down. These also provide a shadow, to provide shade, to also enable rain to be kept in check, and also to bring some coolness and altitude, because again, some of the Chilean vineyards are extremely high. We often think of Argentina as being all about altitude, but also Chile is as well. And Casa Silva, we stock a number of their wines, and I just think they're a really good bang on for the money. They've got some really good, well-made winemaking to each of the wines, and they also show off the varietal characteristics, but not too overly done. This is lovely, fresh, ripe, just that little bit of nice spice going on there. Textural, fantastic, wonderful by itself, but wonderful with the starter dishes. Now, just before we move on to the next one, just a bit more about food and wine tasting. Again, it's a bit like wine tasting itself. It's subjective, a lot of it. It's subjective of what you like. What I might think is a perfect match might not necessarily be what you think is a perfect match. Now, there is some science behind it, because obviously I think with certain chemicals, and chemistry in a wine and in a food, these can often either complement or clash with one another. I think, like when we look at tasting, when we look at tasting, we think of initially that all the taste is in the mouth. There is a taste bud there. The mouth generally tastes things like sweetness, saltiness, sourness, bitterness, and another taste called umami. And umami is a savoury taste. If you think of things like cooked mushroom, soy sauce, that kind of taste. And your mouth is also there. It gets like I suppose the weight of something, whether something's light or heavier, the density, whether something's silky or it's got more acidity to it. That's kind of what your mouth is tasting. The rest is all to do with your nose. And just up here in this part of your head, there's a thing called an olfactory bulb. Up here, it's got the good, the bad, and the ugly of all the different aromas and flavours that you've encountered over the years. Partly genetic as well, of what your body will pick up. Some people are more sensitive to certain aromas and flavours than others, and also what you prefer. So all these things will make for what you like in a wine and what you don't like in a wine, and also for food as well. But equally, these things that are in the food, like the textures, the sweetness, sourness, bitterness, saltiness, etc., could also clash if you don't match the right wine with it. So that's kind of what we're looking at in there. And I think as a general rule, just things like if you've got an acidic dish, it's better to have an acidic wine to match with it. And I think the initial thought is, well, acid and acid, won't that make the dish and your experience just more acid and not very nice? But it doesn't. It actually complement one another, and it can broaden out the food and broaden out the wine, so it's more silky, textural, and soft. Equally, if you've got a very tannic wine, some things like sweetness can jar with that tannins and just make those tannins more accentuated, and so can acid, maybe more acid in a dish, and then you have a very tannic wine. And the tannin is we're going to come up to next with the red is the experience of where you feel your mouth go very dry, you feel your gums stick to your teeth. Now with those, with the acidity in food, it can make that wine taste more astringent. And what usually helps to make those tannins become softer, become more pleasurable of a sensation in your mouth is protein, because itself tannin is a protein, and so all the proteins that are in meats, cheeses, other dairy products, pulses, etc., can help soften them out. And so can a little bit of salt, a little bit of saltiness in food, so suddenly soften those tannins out. It becomes a silky, more pleasurable experience to enjoy. And again, what we're going to come on to in a little while when we have the pudding wine, sweetness, and like I just broached on a little there, sweetness is an important factor. If you've got a very sweet dish, a pudding to have, and we've all gone there, I know I've done it, I've kept with the wine I've had throughout my meal and thought, oh, I'll just continue with this. And because the wine has got usually got a high level of acidity in it, and it's dry, and then you put that with something that's very sweet and sugary, they just clash. And that lovely wine I've been drinking all evening suddenly doesn't taste as lovely as it did moments ago once I have that sweetness popped in my mouth. So generally with something that's a sweet dish, then sweeter food works. Sweeter wine works better. And we'll come on to an example of that in a little while. So now moving on to the next wine, we're going to have a Côte de Rhône, which is red here, and it's from Destizargues, which is a little village or commune in I think it's right down in the southwest of the Rhône Valley in France. Now the Rhône Valley is famous for its reds, it's split into two halves. The northern Rhône is known for its Syrahs, and the southern Rhône is known for its Grenache-dominated blends. And this is, they say, from the southern part of Rhône. It's from, again, a bit like the Chilean one. It's from the southwest region of there. And this time it's not to do with coolness like the Chilean one was, to do with it being closer to the coast and using the rivers as cooling influences on the climate. This one is closer to the Mediterranean because it's started to get the influences from the further down from the Languedoc. And so here it's about that warmth that is being supplied in this wine. And this particular commune is part of a large commune. This is a Côte de Rhône. Now, the Rhône wines go in much like Burgundy in the way they're classified. They start off as regional, village, and then you get sort of more individual village wines, and then and vineyards. But unlike Burgundy, where things then are classed into Grand Crus and Premier Crus, the Rhône, even though it has these sites, it doesn't sort of, I suppose, promote them like it does in Burgundy. But this is this commune here, this d'Estissagues, is part of a commune which is the Signage, which is or Signag. Hopefully I've said that right. And it's a village appellation, and it's a village that was put in that can use its own name on the bottles. I think from early 2000s, something like that. And this other village, this d'Estissagues, is part of that appellation, that village appellation. It's allowed to supply its wines and goes under that name. However, this one is a Côte de Rhône, and it's just from this particular area. But what I'm trying to emphasize here, that the grapes are of a really decent quality because they go into the village wines as well. This is made by a cooperative, and it's Grenache dominant. It's got some Syrah in there, and I think it's got a dash of Cinsault as well. The Grenache is more dominant. I'm just trying to think how much is actually in there. I think it's about 50%. Yes, it's 50% Grenache, 30% Syrah. Oh no, it's not Cinsault, it is Mourvèdre. So it's 20% Mourvèdre. So it's your classic, what we would say is a GSM wine. I think initially when I look at it, it's got some nice bright colours, and just like the whites, it's about the clarity. It's not like it being cloudy or something floating in it. Now, the difference between a white wine and a red wine, apart from the colour, is how it's made. Where I said earlier with the white wine, you get the grapes, and then you crush the grapes and you get the juice and you separate them from the skins, and then it's the juice that you ferment. With the red, if you did that with a red wine, you'd end up with white wine because the actual colour is in the skins, and inside the red grapes tend to be, on the whole, a sort of more of a clear greeny colour like the white grapes, so you make white wine from them. So it's the skins that are important to get the colour and also a lot of the flavours and aromas. So here, you pick the grapes, you then ferment the actual juice with the skins. And then with this adds colour and it adds flavours to the wines. Now, this is, I think it's got a nice bright ruby colour. It's nice and appealing. And what you sort of, and you can see it's quite a young wine because of that brightness. Now, as a red wine ages, it loses a lot of this sort of bright ruby colours, and it starts to go more to a bricky brown, and also the aromas and flavours change in here. But what I'm expecting here, I look at this, I think this is a youthful type of wine. I'm just looking at the bottle just to see if I can just pick up what's the year. So it's 2018, so it's fairly young. It's had a couple of years behind it. So if I give it a sniff, and immediately it's all about these juicy, lovely, ripe fruits, but they're not overdone. They don't smell over extracted. And what I mean by over extracted is that often there's kind of like a jamminess about them. This doesn't. I'm getting these like lovely raspberry and blackberry fruits, but there's also, I think, if anything is a bit more on that riper side, then there's a bit of strawberry going on there, and this kind of strawberry that I tend to think about when I smell a wine like this is tinned strawberries, and it's tinned strawberries without all that syrupy sugar. but it's got that same, I suppose, sweetness about it in the smell, but without it being sweet, which I know sounds a bit of a daft thing to say, but that's kind of what you pick up as really sort of concentrated, but almost, I suppose, almost like that kind of confected in a way, but without all the sweetness and sugariness that goes with that. And there's just a hint of spice and maybe some earth going on in there as well. Very inviting. And then to taste it, immediately on the palate, all the fruits just really come out at you. And there's some floral notes as well going through there. And it's really fresh. I think the thing that the initial impression that you get is how fresh it is. This freshness is in it really cleanses on your palate, but also it lifts and highlights these lovely bright fruits. So they get those raspberries, I get those strawberries, and I also get a little bit of sort of, maybe a bit of, it almost comes across as like rose or something coming through this. A really lovely flavor combination going on there, and just this hint of spice running through it. Now, because it's being fermented on the skins, like I said not so long ago, it's about the tannins, the dryness there. The tannins are there because the tannins are from the skins, but they're no way intrusive. They give structure, they give that sort of firmness. They've got that, they're more finer grain tannins, and they run along my tongue, but this acidity just keeps them fresh. It stops my mouth feeling dry and stuck, which is nice, because then I think, well, this is kind of nice. I can just drink it by itself, which again, I'm going to take another drop. It's lovely, but with the food, it will be excellent, because I think when you have wines that are really juicy and fruity, they really work well with savoury dishes, meat dishes, and also anything that's got that kind of umami kind of element to them. So this is going to be up against what we have in here, the roast saddle of venison, or the beef haggis pie, or a vegetarian haggis. And I just think this is where this kind of wine highlights those dishes. It's about, it pushes them out there, and it really shows off those meats. It really shows off anything that you've got where, like I say, the vegetarian haggis, where it's got those oats and grains to them. It lifts that, it brings a refreshing element to it. It creates that moisture there, but then it releases those aromas, it releases those flavors. But equally, that savouriness then pushes out that lovely fruit, and again, without it being too prominent that it drowns out the actual dish. It just enhances it. It brings that complement. It's like an added extra bit of seasoning to those dishes, and that again, this acidity there will then push through there any grease or fattiness. It will cleanse it. It will clean it. It will get you ready for another mouthful. And I just think this is a really nice Côtes du Rhône. And like I say, Côtes du Rhône for me, it was, I think, one of the first go-to red wines that I liked when I first started getting more seriously into wine. And I think I did that because it was so delicious in its fruits. They were there, I could taste them. But the oak wasn't there. There wasn't all this real oakiness. Because I think at the time, I mean, I'm talking 20 odd years ago now, the fashion was to have big oaky wines. And for me, the Côtes du Rhône had that side where it wasn't about the oak. It was more about the fruit. It was more about the freshness. And this is what this has got here. And I believe that this wine, as well as a part of its fermentation, has had what's called a wild ferment. And what we mean by a wild ferment, it's a bit trendy nowadays, but it's not a bad thing, because it's all about this terroir, that rather than using inoculated yeast that's being bought in a packet from a laboratory, you just allow in the natural yeasts that are on the grape skins and also that have accumulated around the winery to do their thing. And this adds an extra nuances to the wine, because in there's other types of yeast, and each one will do different things regarding the fermentation. And this adds that extra sort of dimension that you just don't get with something in a packet from a laboratory. That is lovely. That is really, really nice. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I am here. The area of Rhone, the Rhone I was going to say, I explained that there's north and south. I think if you really want to sort of explore reds, and particularly the Syrah and Grenache grape, this is the place to go. In the north, where it's mainly Syrah, you've got places like Hermitage, Crozes Hermitage, etc., that really show off, I think, very good examples of what Syrah can do, and you often get that sort of blackberry and black pepper spice. Moving down, probably the most showy side of the Southern Rhone is the Châteauneuf du Pape, and again, these tend to be Grenache dominated blends. The problem I find with Châteauneuf is it's all about trying to find the producer that suits you, because some are all about big and bold, others are about light and elegant. Also, I think just the name alone, Châteauneuf du Pape, adds a few more quid on price of the bottle, and sometimes that can be disappointing. The wine not always, I think, matches the actual price. Whereas looking further out, and the Côtes du Rhône and the Côtes du Rhône village wines is, I think, a really good place to start. The Côtes du Rhône wines and some of the really basic ones are made just for easy drinking, and can even be chilled just a little bit. There's nothing wrong with chilling red wines. The only time I'd say don't chill a red wine is if it's a big, full-bodied beast with loads and loads of oak and tannins, because that will just accentuate that dryness and those tannins, and it will taste like, I suppose, like a stewed, like similar to a stewed cold cup of tea. It won't be pleasurable at all. But a lot of red wines, and even this, I mean, I've had this just slightly chilled, and it's very enjoyable because the tannins, even though they're there, they're not intrusive enough or enough of them to just become prominent. It's all about, there's a lot of fruit going on in here, but it's fruit that's done in a serious way. It's not about making a fruit punch. It's still got that spicy side. There's still that earthy side in there. There's undertones running through there that make this a serious type of wine. But it's lovely. It's just so enjoyable to have, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I am. I'm just going to have one more mouthful. Fantastic, lovely. Right, okay. So we're going to move on to puds and pudding wines. Now, with desserts, as I've said, having a wine that is acid and dry or tannins can often will sort of conflict with a pudding that is sweet. So the best thing to do is have a wine that's got sweetness to it as well, if not as sweet or sweeter than the dish you're going to have. The other added bonus of a sweet wine is that the sugars work really well with salt. So salty foods, particularly salty cheeses like Stilton, for example, just work so good together. I mean, you know, if you're going to, you might be a bit stinky afterwards, but my word, they are just such a marriage that just work. They're just heavenly to have. But here we've got a choice of puds, which I'll read out. So look what we've got. So we've got two puds that Collins Fine Foods have made for us, and these are the Pear and Honey Whiskey Grenache or the Dranberry Chocolate Mousse. Both are fantastic, and both will go very nicely with our Rutherglen Muscat. Now, Rutherglen Muscat is particular. It's a speciality that comes from the Victoria district of Australia. It's made from Muscat grapes. The Muscat grapes, there's lots and lots of different ones of them. This one, the Australians refer to this as the brown Muscat because it is a red Muscat grape. Now, Muscat grapes on the road, if you have them as a dry wine, are very aromatic. You're thinking the Muscat, you know, it's that musk perfume, spiced. I often think of it's very sort of spicy flowers. It's got there often things like citrus peel, etc., etc. in the wines. Even a bit of lavender sometimes I can pick up in them. But here, what they've done with the Muscat is they've allowed it to age a little on the vine. So by leaving it as long as they can on the vine, is allowing the sugars to accumulate. So it's getting very sugary, but it's still maintaining a decent level of acidity. That's the thing that they've got to kind of get the balance right. Then what they do is then they pop it into some big open barrels. So sometimes these are wooden barrels, but it's not about the wood influence. And they allow this Muscat, because it's got lots of sugar in it, the yeasts really struggle with the fermentation process. It usually gets to about 2% alcohol, and then they fortify this one. And what they mean by fortified is they add grape spirit into this. And this brings the level up to where this one is, which I believe is, what's this one? I think it's about 15, yeah, 17.5%, this one. So they bring it up to this ABV of 17.5%. But what this does, it also traps all the sugar that the yeasts have converted into alcohol themselves. So then you've got this sweet, slightly alcoholic wine that then is left by being then transferred to barrel. And in these barrels, it can be put into a similar system to what is in Spain with sherry, a solera. And a solera is you have different levels of barrels from different years. So you'll have the youngest wine on top, and gradually get to the oldest wine at the bottom. And the oldest, and what you do is the youngest wine you pop in, and then as you refresh it with younger wine, you take a percentage of that wine out and put it in the barrel below, and then the barrel below you take a percentage out and put it in that, and so forth. So you get to the bottom, and then you draw some off, and then you make the wine. So this is the Rutherglen Muscat. This is their I suppose would be classed as an entry level range, as they go up in years. This one has an average year of between 4 and 5 years of age, and what they mean by that is there's different vintages, from the fresh new vintage up to maybe at the bottom. The bottom one has been there for 5 years, and then you're going to get this average age of wine as they get mixed together and they're blended together. Now, this is fantastic just by itself. I love it. It can just be dessert on its own. As you can see, it's a very dark colour here. It's got that kind of what would be maybe described as tawny. And if you just look, if you get your own glass, you can see that it's from a red grape. You can see the red in there. It's still got it. And this is a bit like, I suppose, like tawny port. Often tawny ports, when you do swirl them around, you can still see the red from the red grape varieties that we use to make the port. So this has got that sort of similarity in there, that you can see there's a red tinge going on still in there. Now, when I swoosh this around in the glass, I can see that it's got a very viscous, it would be the word. It's got some heaviness there, some body to it already. I can see that as I move it round. Now, when I stick my nose in, and core blimey, I mean, when that it just hits straight at you, I get raisins, dates, orange peel. This is like something just freshly you just sort of grated an orange, and underneath that maybe a little bit of chocolate cocoa. And then tasting it, wow, it coats your mouth, it caresses, it's like silk around your tongue. It just glides around your mouth, and the acidity just keeps it cutting through there, keeps that freshness, so it's not sticky, so it just doesn't land and then stays there, and then it doesn't move. And also, as I'm tasting it, what I was getting on the nose, those raisins, the dates, the citrus fruits, they're there, but I'm getting an extra element here. I'm getting a real dark bitter chocolate, maybe espresso coffee. And that coffee taste is becoming far more evident as it gets towards the finish. And when we talk about the finish, what we're talking about is when you put the wine in your mouth, excuse me, and you get the it's what's called on the palate. The initial taste you get is what's referred to as the approach, and this could be the initial reaction, the initial impression you get of a wine. This is often the part where you get the fruits, and then the next part is what's referred to as the mid palate. And this is say maybe it's been there a second or around there, and you might find these other little nuances starting to come through, and you might be able to work out more about the texture and the acidity and the structure of the wine. Then finally, as you swallow the wine, this is called the finish. And then what pleasant aftertaste there is, the longer that lingers, the better made that wine is said to be. And with this one, I'm getting this nice, lovely sort of dark bitter chocolate, this essence of coffee, there's that raisin there, there's that fruit cakey side to it. And it's a real sort of pleasant aftertaste that I'm getting. And my mouth doesn't feel sticky in any way because it's just had that nice fresh acidity to just keep everything lovely and clean. That's fantastic. If you like this, you'll probably like PX Sherry as well, which is of a similar ilk, I think, in its kind of profile of taste. And again, like PX Sherry, I think you could quite easily drizzle this over some ice cream as well, or you could maybe add some of this to your pear and honey and whiskey Grenache or your Drambuie chocolate mousse. I don't think anybody would complain about that at all. But that is lovely, and again, with dessert wines, you can often get overlooked. People get worried about, oh, it's got lots of sugar in it, and this, I think it's got about between 180 to 240 grams of sugar per litre, which compared to a dry wine, the wines we've been having, which are usually between 4 to 5 grams, you can see there's a big difference. But in the right place at the right time, I think they're fantastic and they should not be overlooked. they're to be enjoyed, and I think when you're having food with the wines, it makes for that journey. It makes for it to be a pleasant journey, one that is more of a whole journey, one that makes a lot of sense by putting these together. So do not overlook them. I think that this is fantastic. Now this Stanton and Glean are a very old producer of Rutherglen Muscats. They are, I'm sure they're from England originally, the family, and they have been there a good couple of 100 years, and they're still family run today, which I like. And in wine, you often find this, and I always think that gives it that impression of things being more, excuse me, hands-on, more about the care, more about attention, because there's that heritage that goes with it as well. There's people wanting to make sure that things are made in a manner that reflect them in a good light, and to right. That's how it should be. Right. So there, the 3 wines. You've got your 3 dishes, and obviously there's going to be ample wine to have between those dishes and to enjoy, and I hope you do. Thank you once again for signing up to our Guest Wines and Collins Fine Foods Wine and Dines. There'll be more coming along as we go along. Do keep yourself informed, and to do this, just sign up to our newsletter. We'll send out regular updates of tastings such as this, Zoom tastings, and hopefully in the not so distant future we'll be able to do tastings as well in person. And also on our newsletter, you'll be the first to know about fantastic discounts and offers before anybody else gets to know about them, before we put them on the website to the general public. And you can find this at www.guestwines.com. And on there on our website, you can then find out more about us. You can look on our shop. If you need to get in touch, you can either give us a ring or you can drop us an email. We're also on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all the other likes. So thank you very much. Thank you once again. If you've got any comments that you want to make, please get in touch. It'd be great to hear your comments on tonight and anything that you thought about the wines and the foods. Hopefully we'll see you again. Look after yourselves, stay safe, and enjoy the rest of the wines. Thank you, and cheers.